It's The Big Take from Bloomberg News and iHeartRadio. I'm Wes Kosova. Today, the richest family in the world that you've maybe never heard of.
The children of Sam Walton, who of course started Walmart, each of them gained $3.9 billion each, totaling $12 billion just today.
Rob Walton will be the new owner of the Denver Broncos.
The art world witnessed history this week when the Peggy and David Rockefeller collection scored a record sum at auction. The final total, $832 million.
Charles and David Koch may not be running for president, but they are certainly poised to decide who will, and making plans to spend nearly $1 billion on the 2016 election, outstripping both major...
Now those names, they're probably familiar. The Rockefellers, of course, from the old school of vastly wealthy American families. These days, though, the Rockefellers don't even register among the likes of the crazy rich like the Waltons you heard in that clip, founders, of course, of Walmart. Members of the Walton family occupy 3 of the top 20 spots on Bloomberg's Billionaire Index, with a combined net worth topping $200 billion. The Koch family, they take up 2 spots in the top 20 with $136 billion. Today, though, we're talking about a family in the United Arab Emirates that's likely as rich or richer than both of them, and is possibly the wealthiest family on earth. It's the Nahyan family. And if that name isn't ringing a bell, you probably are familiar with some of the companies the Nahyans are invested in. Because depending on where you live, the family might own the grocery store you shop in, apartments in your neighborhood, some of your favorite brand names, or the team you root for.
New York City FC, the football club, and of course SpaceX, as well as Rihanna's lingerie business. They've worked on a variety of VC deals with prominent folks in Silicon Valley as well.
To learn more about this family and its global reach, I'm joined by Bloomberg reporters Ben Bartenstein, who you heard just a moment ago, and Nico Parasie. They're both in Dubai. And wealth reporter Devon Pendelton joins from New York. They and our colleague Farah El-Barawi have put together a big story about the Al Nahyan family. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
So you have uncovered the vast wealth and long reach of this family, the Nahyan family. Devon, maybe we can just start with you. Can you tell us about the family? Who are they?
Sure. So the family is the Al Nahyans, and they are the ruling family of Abu Dhabi, which is the capital of the United Arab Emirates. The family have been in a very, very prominent position for decades, centuries in this region. And the UAE is a very small country. It is made up of 7 emirates, which banded together, I believe, in the early 1970s to officially become a country called the United Arab Emirates, in a sort of a union not too dissimilar to the USA. So they are separate, but they are one country. And Abu Dhabi, of which the Al Nahyans are the rulers, happens to be especially powerful in this little country, because their little teeny emirate happens to sit on the vast majority of the oil reserves in the area. So they are tremendously wealthy, the actual emirate, just kind of by dint of the geography where they are. So when oil was discovered decades ago, they went from being quite powerful to extremely powerful, because all of a sudden they had this huge economic flow kind of coming into their region that they ruled. So that really put them on the map. Their power has only grown and grown and grown since that happened.
The structure of the family is sort of important. So tell us how the family is structured, who leads it, and what are the roles of different members of the family, and what do they play?
Yeah, so we've really seen a new generation of leadership now since the passing of Sheikh Khalifa back in May. MBZ, the President Mohammed bin Zayed, is president of the UAE. His brother, Sheikh Tahnoon, is the UAE National Security Advisor. Sheikh Mansour, another brother, is the Deputy Prime Minister. So they're in 3 of the highest political posts, but also controlling vast sums of private capital, which is what we delve into in our reporting. But Khalifa has many more children. Yeah. It's just the brothers who are in these really prominent positions right now atop Abu Dhabi. So they're sort of the third generation, you could say, of Abu Dhabi leadership.
Do these brothers cut a big public profile? Are they private? Are they out and about? Are they sort of see and be seen kind of people?
Very private, very discreet. They don't give interviews. They rarely appear in the media, occasionally pictures when they go abroad and meet with their counterparts in places like Turkey or Egypt. But rarely seen here in public. And they definitely do not talk or boast about their wealth.
I should say that representatives of the Al Nahyans didn't respond to your requests seeking comment. So we have this very old, very wealthy, prominent family. People listening to this might be thinking what I'm thinking, which is, wouldn't you just assume that they're incredibly rich? What did you find, Devon, that was so surprising when you started really looking into their wealth?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's kind of like a very unsurprising revelation that this family is extremely rich. But what makes this story sort of exciting to us was that we were actually able to really kind of put a number on it. Because if you think about these families in the petrostates that have ruled and have sort of benefited in some ways from energy flows for decades, and it's a lot of kind of rumor and conjecture over how rich they are. And like, where do you draw that line between state money and royal money? Because I think another important thing to point out is that these families are very big. Like, we're not just talking about like grandparents and their kids and their kids. Like, it's not just sort of a straight multi-generational line. We're talking in some cases thousands of people. Like the Saudi royal family, the numbers are, nobody even knows for sure, but it could be like 15,000 to 25,000 people. The Al Nahyans clan is not that big, but it still is quite large. And that's partly because you have multiple wives in many cases. So there were different lines of children from different wives. And those different lines of children were sometimes more important depending on how close you were genetically, like how close in the tree to the trunk, to the ultimate kind of patriarch of this emirate. So the family is very big. And then also, where exactly is that sort of distinctive line between, okay, this is state money, this is the treasury, and this is for the family. This is what they can dip into to buy yachts or to buy palaces or whatever they want. And that, like so many states, you know, in the early times, was very loose. Like, who knew really where that line was? And there's just not a lot of visibility. I mean, these states, too, because they were so wealthy, they weren't really going to the bond markets. They didn't have to really have a great deal of visibility into their finances to that degree. So we didn't really know, but we assumed, like we saw royal families buying racehorses and nice places in London and sort of thought, gosh, they're wealthy. But what we can see here is that because the Al Nahyans very kind of recently have become very active in investing, very active in business, kind of on their own, like in their own personal capacity, we can really look at their businesses and value them. And it's pretty fascinating to see them kind of stepping out as individuals in this way.
All right, so let's get to the question. Just how rich are they?
So we came up with an at least number of about 300 billion. If you take that as kind of the floor of their wealth, I mean, that alone would put them on the top of what we track as the world's richest families, which the list published last week, and then it came out with the Waltons, who you mentioned earlier, Wes, is number one with 225 billion.
And this is on Bloomberg's list of the wealthiest people.
Yes, Bloomberg's list. This would put them way above that. So as a point of comparison, I mean, I think that's another thing that's distinctive, too, is we say, oh, like these families are rich. Of course they're rich. But this is quantifying. It's our best effort to quantify just how much more rich they are.
And this is the family's wealth as separate from official wealth having to do with Abu Dhabi itself.
Yes, to the best of our ability to tread that line, to kind of discern where that line is, which again is really hard. I mean, there is some intermingling, probably. It's really tough to tell. On our list of richest families, the Saudi family, the Al Sauds are on there as well at about $105 billion.
Almost 3 times.
Yes, almost
richer.
3 times. But, you know, anybody could say, well, Saudi Arabia, I mean, that they are far bigger than Abu Dhabi in terms of oil reserves. Why would they be less rich? And that's, a great question. A lot of that is kind of what we're able to value, like what we're able to assess, because Saudi Arabia is more opaque in this way. The family has not gone out. The family members, the princes and princesses, haven't gone out in the same way as the Al Nahyan family members and invested in their own names. With a couple exceptions, they haven't done it to this scale. So it's much harder to value. It's much harder to tell. And there's also, you could also argue that, the country, there's far bigger, there's far more people in Saudi Arabia. The demands on the budget are much higher. So the kind of spoils that's left over for the royal family could arguably be smaller. And that's kind of one of the assumptions we make in our analysis.
So now, as you said, that money sort of is spread across a very large family. Dozens and dozens of people have a piece of it. There isn't just some big pile of money and everyone can go grab at it. Are there some who have far more than others?
Probably, yes. Like I said, there's going to be certain lines of the family that, depending on kind of how they rank in the family, this is kind of an amorphous concept, but some families' branches outrank others depending on how close they are, how powerful. Sheikh Tahnoon and Sheikh Mansour and Sheikh Mohammed they're full brothers, and their mother was very savvy politically, and she made sure that her 6 sons were well positioned in the family. So thanks to their mom's kind of smart networking, basically, or whatever you need to do within the family, their sons were lined up to kind of like have some of the primo positions and possibly access to great deals.
Ben and Nick, I'm interested to hear, how do people in Abu Dhabi regard the Al Nahyan family and their wealth? What do they think of them?
Well, I guess as a starting point, for most people in Abu Dhabi, these are their employers, whether they work for the state oil giant where the brothers sit at the top of the board, whether they work for one of these private investment vehicles managing the money on behalf of the brothers. Practically everyone can trace their job, the building in which they're living, the building in which they're working to one of the companies controlled by this family. So I think from that standpoint, as long as their standard of living personally is good, then they would put the family in high regard, particularly in the boom times, which Abu Dhabi is in right now, given the way oil prices are trading.
Yeah, and to add to that, the United Emirates, the indigenous population, so Emiratis nationals, are a minority in their own country. So most of the workforce here is internationals, are immigrants coming here. So they are all here as guests, here to improve their livelihoods, to earn their livelihoods, to improve their lives. So I think in general, the wealth of the ruling family is not it's not a daily topic. It's not something you second guess or speculate about. It's just a fact of life and being here in the UAE.
My conversation with Devon, Nico, and Ben continues after the break. So you spelled out their wealth, and you also talked about how difficult it is to find it. How do you go about finding their wealth? Like, how did you determine how rich they are?
Well, one thing that helped us a lot kind of establish like a very high floor for their wealth is we spoke about how that they have some unusually big publicly traded companies. And Sheikh Tahnoon he founded a conglomerate which has grown and grown in recent years called Royal Group. And one of Royal Group's biggest divisions is a company called International Holding Company. So that's a sort of an investment conglomerate within this investment conglomerate. And International Holding, which is also called IHC, shortened version, is publicly traded on the Abu Dhabi Stock Exchange. And it has grown into just a really vast company in a very short amount of time. I was looking at the stock prices, and it looks like in the past 3 years, this price has gone up almost 8,000%. Does that sound right, Ben?
Yeah, I know it's more than 20,000% over the past 5 years, which I believe is number one globally for any company with more than $1 billion in market cap.
Wait a minute, this company grew 20,000% in 5 years?
You heard that correct.
Is there any company that's grown that fast?
Not
by
in
Bloomberg
recent
metrics.
Not in recent times. Yeah, so its market cap, it's around 200 billion.
It's sitting right around 200 billion. Yeah, so that's in the same league as McDonald's, slightly more than Nike, Disney, other household names in the US.
So its market cap, the value of all of its shares exceed the value of those companies.
Correct.
So that IHC is majority owned by Royal Group, which is owned by Sheikh Tahnoon. So that is a really interesting example of a powerful royal striking out in business. And a lot of, and this is something you see kind of across the Gulf to a degree, but a lot of the investments, I mean, this company doesn't have like one thesis. Like it's not there to do oil pipelines. It's not there to make vials or widgets. I mean, they invest in all sorts of different areas. I mean, in a dozen, probably close to different categories: healthcare, in energy, entertainment. So they own publicly traded companies as well as privately have stakes in private companies as well.
And not just in the Middle East, but in Europe and in the United States, other places?
All over the world. I mean, just right now, they've offered a stake of almost $2 billion for a huge stake in a Colombian food producer. I mean, one of the biggest food manufacturers in Colombia. They own a stake in Rihanna's lingerie line in Fenty. So hugely diversified. And part of this is strategic, that this region, and it's not too different than the basic idea behind a sovereign wealth fund, is to diversify. It's a rainy day fund, and they want to diversify the wealth that's accumulated over time from energy into non-energy industries. It's like, the thesis that any investor would try to take to kind of, build a good long-term portfolio for long-term growth. They're just doing it in a really aggressive time frame. This is ramped up very quickly, and they have a tremendous amount of money that they can deploy. And right now, I mean, this is probably coming into just like a really exciting time for them because they're seeing valuations come down so much. I mean, they can just go on a bargain shopping spree.
And have they been doing that, buying up a whole lot of stuff?
It's tough to have visibility on the non-listed entities within Royal Group, for instance. But what we do know is that, to Devon's point, there's been a focus in the past on emerging markets, assets in India, for instance. More recently, there's been more of a focus on some of the beaten down assets in the US and Europe. Just because the valuations have become more attractive, they're looking more to deploy billions of dollars into these markets as well. So not just EM, but also developed markets.
And what sort of things are they purchasing in emerging markets in India and other sort of cheaper securities now in the U.S.?
Well, a lot of the investment decisions come down to close personal relationships. This is a place that a lot of deal makers are flying into Abu Dhabi, but they find it takes some time to build the trust of the Al Nahyan family. So these investment decisions aren't usually quick decisions, but things that come from long cultivated relationships with deal makers. For instance, Sam Zell, the prominent U.S. real estate titan, he has a longstanding relationship with Sheikh Tahnoon. Same goes for the Colombian billionaire Jaime Galinsky, who Devon was referring to. Same goes for Gautam Adani, the wealthiest man in Asia. He has a longstanding relationship with the Abu Dhabi royals as well. So a lot of these investment decisions stem from long cultivated relationships and then capitalizing on a perceived attractive opportunity based on valuations at any particular moment.
They're also often made on the back of geopolitical developments. So when the UAE or Abu Dhabi restores or improves diplomatic relationships with, let's say, Turkey or Israel or Egypt, or wants to support Egypt's economy, then these vehicles linked to Sheikh Tahnoon often come in and buy some of the companies there.
So you're able to track a lot of these public companies just because there are disclosures. Were you able to dig into some of the more private dealings and discover wealth that wasn't known before?
I could just briefly say, I guess, like one of the newer entities under Sheikh Tahnoon's umbrella is this interesting artificial intelligence firm called Group 42. Now, they were close partners with the Chinese government in manufacturing COVID vaccines. More recently, they've worked on driverless cars and launched a national genome sequencing project. So this is another one of these private entities. In their instance, in their case, private, although they have now recently listed a subsidiary. But through some of the investment partnerships they have with international firms, we've been able to arrive at least an estimated valuation for the company. So again, as these private Abu Dhabi entities partner with international investors, that can at least give us some glimpse of how much money they truly are worth.
More with our reporters when we come back. Devon, you found that the Al Nahyan family has a lot of real estate around the world.
They do, which is very, that's kind of right out of the royal family's playbook. Royal families everywhere, especially in the Gulf. They love real estate. They've always a long time loved London in particular, some of the most beautiful and fancy neighborhoods in London, like Knightsbridge and Berkeley Square and South Kensington. There's always lots of properties there owned by royal families in the Gulf who often would spend significant amounts of time there in the summer.
And on the show the other day, we were just talking about Russian billionaires buying super yachts. And I think the Al Nahyan family also has a super yacht of their own.
Oh, yes. In fact, they have at least 3. I was actually speaking to one of the biggest yacht brokers in the world the other day, and he was telling me how, I was asking him about, growth across the world and where are you seeing, especially with the Russians sort of cut out of the market largely for their business, where are you seeing growth? Is it in the UAE? And he was saying, yeah, to some extent, we're saturated because they've sold a yacht to pretty much everybody who cares to have a yacht in the country, and certainly the royal family. I mean, having a yacht's a lot of upkeep, and how much time do you even spend on it, especially when you're really actively investing? So he was saying pretty much, the market's reached peak saturation until they're ready to trade up.
I was just going to say, in fact, the deal makers who work most closely with the Al Nahyan brothers typically don't need to book a hotel room when they travel to Abu Dhabi. They find that there's extra space waiting for them on one of the brothers' yachts.
Well, that's where visitors stay when they do business deals. They just stay on those big ships.
Exactly.
So if I'm sitting in the U.S., which I am, or in London or Beijing, why should I care that this family has so much money? How does that actually affect me? Ben, you had mentioned a little bit about how oil prices can rise or fall depending on decisions made by this family. Can you describe a little bit more about that and other ways in which this family's wealth has reach around the world beyond them just being a bunch of rich people?
Right. Well, I mean, particularly at a moment like this where a lot of consumers around the world are worried about prices at the pump, just making ends meet. The decisions that this family makes, both in terms of energy policy, but also the investment decisions they make, which can significantly swing assets that a lot of people, might hold in their pension funds or just, their personal investments. These brothers can really move markets in significant ways, and not just, again, energy prices, but stock prices, et cetera. Where they put their money has a dramatic impact.
Sheikh Mansour also bought a very important franchise in the UK. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so in 2008, Mansour's, it was a vehicle owned by Mansour, bought the UK Premier League club, Manchester City, which was at the time a relatively underperforming team. It was always eclipsed by its much more famous neighbor, Manchester United. But since they bought it in 2008, the club has gone from success to success. They won 6 Premier League titles since then, compared to 2 in the more than 100 years before. And they've grown this investment into kind of a sports imperium, a global sports empire consisting of other clubs. So they now own clubs in France, in Australia, in the US as well. And they've gradually increased revenue. So it's been a financial success. They sold 10% in it to a US private equity fund called Silver Lake. So both on the business side, but also on the sports side, many consider it a great success. It's kind of enabled them to project a far more benign image on the world stage, linked to football, and is being viewed by everyone globally as one of the most watched sports.
So we have sports teams around Europe. In the U.S., what are some of the companies they are involved in that people would be familiar with and maybe not even know that the family has a stake in it?
Well, Nico had just hinted at New York City FC, the football club, soccer for U.S. listeners club, and of course SpaceX, as well as Rihanna's lingerie business. They partnered on a variety of venture capital deals with a longstanding partner of Jared Kushner's. They've worked on a variety of VC deals with prominent folks in Silicon Valley as well.
When you look at the future of this family, what do you see? Where do they go from here?
Well, I think this moment where valuations are coming down, like I was saying, they have a real opportunity.
Where stocks are just cheaper because the markets are so volatile.
Stocks are cheaper. There's a lot of people looking for cash right now to help them out through surging inflation, difficult times.
And they've got it.
And I think that they have a huge opportunity to increase their footprint here.
What's interesting about the Al Nahyan family investments is the role they can play with some struggling states in the Middle East. I guess we think historically about the role the IMF might play as a lender of last resort, or in other instances, China, how China could be the lender of last resort. But at a time right now of high oil prices, it's actually some of the Gulf states that are playing this role, helping prop up countries such as in Egypt, for instance, that might be struggling due to its reliance on imports. So again, back to sort of the daily livelihoods of people in countries, especially in the Middle East, their investment decisions can really have a significant impact.
Devon Pendelton, Nico Parasie, and Ben Bartenstein, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you, Wes. It was fun.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Cheers.
You can find this story on the Al Nahyan family at Bloomberg.com. Thanks for listening to us here at The Big Take. It's a daily podcast from Bloomberg and iHeartRadio. For more shows from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Read today's story and subscribe to our daily newsletter at Bloomberg.com/bigtake. And we'd love to hear from you. Email us with questions or comments to bigtake@bloomberg.net. The supervising producer of The Big Take is Vicky Bergalina. Our senior producer is Catherine Fink. Our producers are Mo Barrow and Michael Falero, with additional production support from Rebecca Chasson and Sam Gabauer. Raphael Amsili is our engineer. Original music by Leo Sidran. I'm Wes Kosova. We'll be back tomorrow with another Big Take.